I do want women to know that there is an alternative to suppressing their bodies with hormones, that they can see their body as a good and they can live in that body holistically.
Totally. Oh my gosh, it's amazing.
Join co-hosts Jamie Rocci and Teresa Kenny as they educate women about the beauty of the feminine design and empower women to take charge of their health.
They're going to be so amazing. You're going to be so empowered by understanding your feminine genius and your hormone genius. I don't think I could live my whole life knowing this and not sharing it with anyone.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hormone Genius podcast. I am so excited for today's interview because Teresa and I are here with Dr. Sarah Hill. And our listeners have probably heard of Dr. Sarah Hill. And I was pumped when I saw, Dr. Sarah, that you would join us for our podcast today. Both Teresa and I got to meet you at the FACS conference just a few weeks ago. So again, it's just so fun to be in this sphere, running around with people who are so influential in this world of women's health, because women need to know what you have to share with them, Dr. Sarah. So, Dr. Sarah, you are well known, of course, in this area. You've written several books. You've done several speaking engagements. All any of our listeners have to do is search your name, and they're going to learn all about you. But we're going to hop right into this interview. Dr. Sarah, I heard about you at Barnes & Noble, basically. I heard about you at Barnes & Noble. I'm a nerd. I love to learn. And I was so captured by the title of one of your books. You know, This Is Your Brain on Birth Control. And I'm like, whoa, I'm going to read this book. And I did. And I bought the book and I did the Audible and I did all of it. And I remember once waiting in line at Menards to buy some lumber with the AirPod in my ear, just listening like the whole day. So, Dr. Sarah, how did you become so passionate about this topic? I want to start off with that.
Yeah, I love the idea of being in your ear at Menards, buying lumber. That's just like a really wonderful visual. So I actually got into this sort of in a circuitous way. My research career has been spent studying women. And I've always been really interested in women's psychology. And my early research was actually really focused on things like partner attraction. It's like mate attraction, who we're attracted to. And I always looked at things from the sort of female perspective because I am one. And that was always the more interesting sort of viewpoint in my view, is trying to understand women. Psychologically, women are just a lot more complicated than men. And so it makes us a lot more fun to try to understand as a scientist. And, you know, I had been a researcher for, 15 years. And I went somewhere in that journey, I think it was probably about 10 years in, I went off of hormonal birth control. And so I was on hormonal birth control for pretty much 12 years straight, plus or minus the time I spent pregnant with my kiddos and then the time I was breastfeeding. So I was like, I'd go off the pill, I'd immediately get pregnant, then I would breastfeed for a year, and then I'd be right back on the pill. And so, it was like the only state that I really knew, like hormonally, was pregnancy, lactating, or hormonal birth control. And then I was about 32 years old. It was after my second child, my son was born, and when I was done nursing, I decided that it was time to go off of hormonal birth control. My husband agreed to take care of birth control surgically, and so then, you know, I was able to go off of it. And when I went off of it, I felt completely different. So it was like about 3 months in, like after discontinuing, I just sort of noticed that, like, you know, I feel different than I used to. Like, I had more energy than I did before. I was feeling things more deeply. I downloaded new music from iTunes for the first time in like 10 years. I was like into new music, and I just like wanted to move my body. I was going back to the gym. I was cooking again because I used to like to cook. So it was like all of this stuff that was like about pleasure and just like my senses, all of it just got heightened. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I was like, oh, you know, and on the one hand, it's like I've been studying women and especially women's sexual psychology. And I'd even published papers on the effects of women's cycling sex hormones on motivational states in women. So it's like, on the one hand, I knew that hormones affected the brain. I'd published papers on it. But it's another thing altogether to have that happening experientially. I was like, because, I'd write about this stuff, but I didn't even really think about the fact that really, it's not just about sex, right? It's not just about motivation, for looking sexy. It really changes the filter by which your brain is experiencing the world around you. And so it was in that realization that I had when I went off of hormonal birth control, and just the realization of how much more alive and, sort of like back to myself that I felt, that I decided to go after that line of research, because I was just so curious about what did researchers know about the effects of hormonal birth control on the brain and the way that women experience themselves and the way they experience the world around them. And then when I got into the research literature and saw that, people had been publishing on this stuff since the 90s, and women are never told about any of it, I felt it really to be an important message for women to hear. Because I think that there was a lot of women out there who were like me, who had a blind spot. Because it was like, even though, I studied women and had even published papers on the effects of women's hormones on psychology, it just didn't really dawn on me just how fundamental that is in terms of shaping the experience of being the person that you are, until I had the experience of going off of it. And so, yeah, it was really my personal experience that led me on this path that made me so passionate about making sure that women really fully understand the impacts of their hormones on the way that they experience themselves and the world around them.
Dr. Sarah, I just started with a medical student yesterday. So, I'm in clinical practice. I'm a women's health nurse practitioner, and I get a new student, and she's learning all the things, and she's so excited for this women's health rotation. And my practice is more restorative, reproductive medicine. So she's seeing it, and she's been in family practice where she's seeing birth control just being dispensed like every day. And personally, she's like, I've been on birth control since I've been 16, since I had painful periods. This is such a common experience. And already, she said, after the first day, I have learned more about hormones than I've ever learned in any of my schooling. And she said, I can't believe how cycle aware and body aware your patients are. And, I was like, oh, yeah, they are, because the people generally who seek me out are people who already they're interested in this and they have a passion for it. But there's a whole population of women who, like you said, have a blind spot for this information. And that's why Jamie and I are so passionate also about sharing information with women, because this is about informed consent. It's about a culture of women who didn't know about their hormones in their body. It's about women like you who almost, and I think you said this in a previous podcast, realized they were seeing in black and white and woke up to a colorful world they hadn't seen before. And I have seen that with my patients too, almost like it dulled their femininity. Yeah. It dulled their senses and their femininity. And so I don't know if you want to speak to that just in terms of that experience.
Yeah, it's funny because that's exactly it. Is that it really does dull that sense of yourself as your femininity. And on the one hand, that sounds trivial. Like it sounds like, so it dulls your sense of femininity. And so that's going to maybe influence your sex drive but it's really fundamental. And I didn't, even though I'd read and again, like I said, published papers on women's sex hormones and the way that they influence, especially sexual motivation and women's like desire to, feel sexy and make themselves look sexy. It's like you hear that and that sounds trivial. But the experience of being somebody who wants to do those things and like feels those things, it's really, I feel like there's not the language yet even to really describe how fundamental that is, because it really it creates the version, it creates a version of yourself that it's it's just completely different. And it's so much more, like there's so much more depth to it, which is one of the things that I, when I talk about the like going from like a black and white line drawing into this like 3-dimensional color reality, like that. Yes, I mean, that's it. It's just like there's so much more amplitude to the experience of life, I think, when you're cycling and your hormones are doing all of the things that hormones do, which includes helping your brain absorb experience, right? And helping us feel into our femininity. And it's a really beautiful thing.
Totally. It's so beautiful. I think about how, even my daughter, she's 13, she got her period last year. And, when she thinks about womanhood, she thinks about like, the red curse, her period. She thinks about cramps. She thinks about that. And often we are raised to associate pain with womanhood. We think about childbearing. That's painful. Your period, it's painful. It's a nuisance. The messaging we get as women is that all that is painful and pain equals bad,
Mm-hmm.
But what we're sharing is actually, okay, while that is true, like there is truth to the pain we do bear, the fact that we can endure it because we're strong, women can be strong, but that there's also strength in these areas that we're all shutting off as a society. We're shutting off the creativity, we're shutting off the motivation, we're shutting off the fullness of the experience of who we actually can be, So no wonder people are thinking, it's either I turn down the pain and I go on maybe birth control to turn down the pain, or maybe I try to manage the pain naturally, get to the root cause of why that period pain hurts so bad. Because newsflash, there may be something going on, if it's painful. And then I love that word amplitude. You bump that up a little bit because again, women aren't ever given that information like you shared.
Right. Yeah, it's so interesting because I think that, on the one hand, it's like you can understand the desire to like decrease negative experiences, right? Whether it's pain or negative mood, but a lot of times that comes at a cost, right? And it's like life like exists in the friction, and sort of the shift between the experiences of pain and the experiences of pleasure. And I think that, when you're on hormonal birth control and you're the way that our emotional responses change in response to that, and the way that our experience of ourself changes in response to that, it kind of flatlines it, And so on the one hand, your cramps might not be as bad, and you might not get mood changes in the second half of the menstrual cycle like you do when you're a cycling woman. But then you also don't get these like really big, beautiful, pleasurable responses that we get, and really in both halves of the menstrual cycle, because of the changes that you get in, for example, like serotonergic activity and dopaminergic activity in the brain from estrogen. And that has the effect of making pleasure more pleasurable, and it increases our feelings of well-being, and to an extent that we don't get when we're having our hormones flatlined on hormonal birth control. And so it's like it's definitely more bumpy, like when you're cycling through your natural hormones, there's going to be more bumpiness just because there's going to be more changes, right? We're going to be experiencing things. But that's like what we're supposed to do in life. I think that so much of modern life, I actually just wrote a Substack post about this, but so much of modern life is about removing friction at every corner, right? We have ultra-processed food. You no longer have to like read a book to get information. We have ultra-processed content in the form of social media posts. We have ultra-processed dating, which is swiping. It's like there's no friction. You don't have to like go out and go into the world and meet people, and you don't have to make your way all the way through a book to get the nuggets of wisdom. You don't have to process all that fiber of the food that you eat to get access to sugar, right? Everything's been ultra processed in this way that's kind of removed friction from our life. And that has the effect of making our brain think that it's getting all of these rewards because it's like going right to the reward without the friction. But the thing that it's like that we don't realize is that without that friction, there's no meaning. The reward becomes meaningless. And I think that the desire to sort of homogenize our hormones with hormonal birth control by shutting down, our own hormone production and then creating this sort of, one day, every day is the same hormonally, is a kind of a similar version of this. It's like removing the friction from womanhood. And in a way that ultimately I think can detract from meaning. And I think that we don't talk about this enough.
We don't talk about it enough. And one of the things I was thinking about just thinking about doing this interview with you today, Dr. Sarah, is just women of the previous generations, and particularly maybe that generation of women right before birth control came out. Every generation has its struggles for different reasons. And then, I think women didn't know their bodies then, and fertility was not something that was understood. So there's a lot of things that they struggled with from of being able to understand their femininity in an ignorance way. But then we moved through birth control and we still have ignorance, and we don't have the ability to be empowered to understand our bodies. But I think this is changing, this enlightenment of women to be like, hey, I think we need to stop and think for a moment about what suppressing feminine hormones and, like you said, making them homogenous for 10 to 15 years, what are the ramifications of that? And there are people that will say you can't question that, right? Like you're not supposed to question that. And that's wrong. Like we should always be able to question anything. Science is an ever-changing situation, and the more information we can understand about our bodies, then the more empowered we are to live happy, healthy, and long lives. So this is about questioning the status quo. And one of the things I've questioned is, what about these young girls who are 16 and they take it all the way to almost 32? What about their bones? And, that was brought up at the FACTS conference. Like, shouldn't we care that they might not reach their peak bone mass? Or what about their brains and how they may not, we always talk about how you don't really mature your brain until you're 25. But what if you've been on synthetic hormones from 15 to 25? Like, what does that change, actually? And I guess you probably already know some of that.
Yeah, well, so you would think that I would know some of that. Believe it or not, the question of what happens to the teen brain when it goes on hormonal birth control and the brain is still developing is a question that almost nobody has even bothered to ask. And so there has been very few studies. I can only think of 5 right now that have actually looked at what does hormonal birth control do when you go on it in adolescence. And so we consider adolescence like, ages like 12 to 19. So what happens when you go on hormonal birth control during that time, and does it have a lasting impact on the way that we experience ourselves in brain development? And there's been some research on animal models. So they've looked at this in mice and rats, because you can actually look at their brains, take them apart and see what's happening. And what they find is that there are changes in brain development when you put these rodents on hormonal birth control compared to not. And there's been research in human females looking at girls who go on hormonal birth control during adolescence, and then looking at their risk of developing major depressive disorder across the lifetime after they go off of it. And what that research seems to suggest is that if you go on hormonal birth control during adolescence, it does increase your risk of developing major depressive disorder across the lifetime. And there's actually a study that's currently being done, but it's not complete yet, where they're going to be looking at brain scans of girls over the course of development based on whether they go on hormonal birth control or whether they're naturally cycling. And my guess is what that study is going to find is that there are differences. And it would almost be impossible for there not to be differences. And the reason for this is as you noted, like your brain isn't done developing until you're 25. And most of the heavy lifting goes on before you're 20. So between 20 and 25, there's some, like extra embellishments being put on the prefrontal cortex, but most of the heavy lifting is done. So that period of time between like 12 and 19. So during the pubertal transition, during this time, I mean, the brain is undergoing a dramatic remodeling project. And when you consider the difference between a child and an adult and just the way that they experience the world and the depth of their emotions and the complexity of their thought, I mean, they're two very different creatures, right? And that's the result of these post-pubertal brain changes that happen. And these changes that are happening during the pubertal transition are being coordinated by the sex hormones. That there's a reason that your hormones are kind of like, we always say, like, they're going crazy, but it's just like your hormones are increasing in these really large and dramatic ways during this time period. And this is part of what's sending the messages to your brain, like, hey, do this, now it's time to do that, to lead to that post-pubertal brain development and to flatline that, right? To just shut off hormone production in girls and then provide a daily dose of a synthetic hormone. I mean, we have no idea what that does to brain development. And that to me is completely crazy that nobody even thought to ask the question until very, very recently. And so now researchers are finally starting to do this. But I mean, we've been putting young girls on hormonal contraceptives for a very long time now. And they're a natural experiment. And that's terrible. People don't want that for their daughters. And so, what do we know about that? Very little. Do I think that going on hormonal birth control during adolescence, do I think that that's going to have lasting brain changes? Yes, I do. Because it would be almost virtually impossible for it not to. Like, to what extent these changes are meaningful, we don't yet know, right? There's the one paper that suggests that it may put you on a path of being at a greater risk of developing depression, but we need more research in this area. Another thing that we need more research on in this area, in addition to the long-term developmental effects that this can have on things like mental health and brain development, also has to do with the extent to which this might delay the brain's ability to be able to communicate effectively with the ovaries. Because during that time during the pubertal transition, when girls first start cycling, the period, that whole experience of the cycle is kind of a mess, and I'm sure that if you have teenagers or if you know people with teenagers or you remember your own teenage years, you tend to have heavy periods. They tend to be erratic. Like 1 month you have them and they're 2 weeks apart, and then another month you have them and they're 6 weeks apart. And a lot of girls will go to the gynecologist for this reason or go to their doctor to get on hormonal birth control because their periods are a mess. But the reason that their periods are a mess is that their brain is just starting to learn to communicate with the ovaries, and they don't have it down yet, because the whole, the cycle is coordinated through the activity of your brain talking to your pituitary gland, which then talks to your ovaries, right? And it regulates itself in a negative feedback loop. So when hormones are being produced, then that tells the brain to not tell the pituitary, to not tell the ovaries to start developing egg follicles, right? And so the brain is learning to become sensitive to sex hormones, right? The ovaries are learning to be sensitive to pituitary hormones, and it takes a little while to work that system out. And it does work itself out. I always tell girls, and I told this to my daughter. I have an 18-year-old daughter. Actually, she's 19 now. Gosh, I have a 19-year-old daughter, and when she was first having her period, and it was a disaster, and it was like, just hold on a little bit and it's going to get a lot better. And of course it did, but it is a little bit of a rocky start. But I think that even if you talk to girls about this and they have the language to understand what's happening and understand that it's temporary, it makes it a lot more tolerable, because then they're able to okay, no, this is just part of a learning curve. Right. And so one of the other questions, to get back to the original point of my long soliloquy, is that we don't yet know whether going on hormonal birth control in the teenage years, whether that has an effect of slowing the learning curve. Right. So do these women who shut it down right away, when they go off of it, does this then, are they having to play catch up? Right, where their brain and ovaries are now having to learn how to communicate with one another. And then does that create issues with cycles that can potentially lead to a delay in the return of full fertility. Like, we don't know, there's not any research on that particular research question either. And these are things that women really deserve to know, and mothers deserve to know, so that way they can make informed decisions about their own bodies or the bodies of their daughters.
Amen. Yeah. An informed decision, I think, is the key here. And women often, mothers, many mothers have no idea. So it's just this very difficult thing. In regards to development and in regards to like the young woman who is, where I like this theory of where the brain and the ovaries are working to communicate and getting into that rhythm, and that potentially birth control could be interrupting that communication. Well, it definitely is, but does it delay it? But in regards to young women are thinking a lot about how they think guys are cute. You know what I mean? They're thinking about, oh my gosh, what's my future husband going to be like? I remember high school Jamie would daydream about like, oh my gosh, like, is that going to be my husband? Is that going to be my husband? Is that going to be? So let's talk about attraction and how birth control may be impacting who we're attracted to, how we're attracted to them. I know we talked a little bit about this earlier on, but even, your expert area of just how we're more attractive to men during certain phases of the cycle. So I'd love to kind of circle around that a little bit too.
Sure. So there's been research that's been done now for several decades showing that women's cycling sex hormones play an important role in attraction. And generally what this research finds is that when estrogen is high across the cycle, so right near ovulation, that this is a time when women's brains are maximally attuned to things related to attraction and sex. And the reason for this is that this is the time in the cycle when sex can lead to conception, right? And so our brain is really optimized to make good mating decisions during this time when we can potentially create life with whoever it is that we choose to mate with. And so what the research finds is that near peak fertility, so within the cycle in the fertile window, when estrogen is high, that this is related to women looking, smelling, and sounding sexier to men. So we know that women are sort of maximally desirable to men when estrogen is high across the cycle. We also know that women during this time have a heightened preference for qualities related to what we call like good genetic quality. So essentially, women become more sensitive to subtle cues of genetic compatibility and of having sort of good genes than what we tend to see outside the fertile window. And what this really shows us, like just to give you an example of what this research looks like, research finds when estrogen is high in the cycle that this is related to women preferring the scent of men who have different immune genes than themselves, for example. And it's essentially that our brain becomes more sensitive to these little tiny differences between the scent portfolios of different men, and that they tend to zero in on those who have different immune genes, with a hypothesis being that this would help to improve the health of their children. Because when you have a greater variety of immune genes, this means that your immune system is better able to detect a wider range of different types of pathogens. There's also research that shows that near ovulation, when estrogen is high, that women exhibit a heightened preference for testosterone-related cues. And testosterone is believed to be, it's a hypothesized good genes indicator. And this is just simply because testosterone is immunosuppressive. And so if a man has a lot of features that suggest that he has high levels of testosterone and has had high levels of testosterone throughout development, it suggests that his immune system is so robust that it was able to withstand being suppressed and to develop all of these testosterone-related cues nonetheless. Because men with lesser immune genes, right, men with lesser immune systems who are not able to withstand having their immune system suppressed, they won't allow it. Their bodies won't allow all of that testosterone to be released because they can't afford the possibility that they're going to get sick. And so when we see a person, a man in particular, who's got these really rugged features, it suggests that his immune system is sufficiently robust that he was able to develop all of those masculinized traits, despite the fact that it was suppressing his immune system throughout development. So fast forward to the female side of things. We know from a lot of research now that women, when estrogen is high, that they have a heightened preference for these types of qualities. They like the scent of men who have different immune genes. They like the sight and sound of men who have higher testosterone levels. And it was only more recently, within the last 10 to 15 years, that researchers then asked themselves, well, wait a minute. So if estrogen predicts a greater preference for qualities related to genetic compatibility and higher levels of testosterone, what happens when you suppress estrogen with hormonal birth control? Like, does that then lead women to have a lesser desire for partners with genetic compatibility, or a lesser preference for qualities related to testosterone cues? And the research seems to suggest yes. So there's only been a very small number of studies. I've only seen 2 that have looked at the genetic compatibility issue, but essentially with the scent, like, do women prefer the scent of men with different immune genes than themselves? And these studies have found that that hormonal birth control does diminish women's preference for genetically compatible men. So women tend to find the scent of all men more or less equally attractive when they're on hormonal birth control compared to what we see when women are on hormonal birth control, suggesting that it's blunting their sensitivity to the scent-based cues. There's also research that finds that women who are on hormonal birth control, and this research is more substantial, have a diminished preference for cues related to facial and vocal masculinity. So again, women having a diminished preference for qualities related to testosterone levels. And what this means is that, our hormones, and we've known this forever, that hormones kind of, and when we talk about this, I think it's important that, on the one hand, this is important, right? Hormones kind of nudge our preferences this way and that way, but not to put too fine a point on it, because what hormones do is they nudge us, right? And so they can kind of nudge you toward thinking that this is more attractive than that, or nudge you into thinking that that is more attractive than the other thing. But they don't tend to have these big, huge sledgehammer effects where it's like, all of a sudden you are on hormonal birth control, you go off of it and you wake up and you're like, oh my goodness, what did I do? That can happen, but it's less common than waking up and not really noticing, or feeling just a little bit more attracted or a little bit less attracted to your partner than you were when you were on it. And so this is kind of an important point to make. So, the takeaway message here is yes, hormones affect attraction. Yes, hormonal birth control can influence who you're attracted to. And yes, for some women, this can actually, if they were on hormonal birth control and they chose their partner and then they go off of it, for some women, it can nudge them out of attraction. Or in some cases, it can actually nudge them into being even more attracted to their partner. But these are little nudges, right? And so it's really only these women who are on the periphery, if we consider everything in a normal distribution, right? Women who are at the extreme ends of high attraction or the extreme ends of low attraction, right? They might get nudged in and out of having their feelings about their own partner change in response to changing hormonal birth control, right? And I do get, I've gotten very many emails from women who've had that experience, right? Where they go off the pill and then they're like, I am not attracted to my partner anymore. And I get these emails because this is what's upsetting. For every one of these women, there's 10 women, right, who went off of hormonal birth control and everything's just fine. So it's just important to understand the context is this is something that can happen because hormones influence attraction, and when you change hormones, you're opening up the possibility of changing attraction. But it doesn't necessarily mean a doomsday scenario for most women who have the experience of choosing a partner when they're on or off of birth control and then going on or off of it.
Gosh, there's just so much to think about with this. I mean, I'm thinking about, okay, anybody who's on birth control and you're dating, you're thinking about marriage, maybe go off for a year and just be sure, right? I mean, there is, that's like you're saying, it's okay, this can't, and you never can just tie this all into everybody's gonna, come off birth control and not want to be with their spouse anymore. Of course not. And there's relationships designed, on many different things, but it is something that's a factor and something to think about. So I think as people listen, it's just kind of one of those things educating your children, your daughters, that this is something we should all be thinking about. And we know this, all of us who are natural cycle people, we know we love our spouses half the cycle, and we don't necessarily love them the same way the second half of the cycle. I mean, this phenomenon happens every month to us. I think you're really beautiful. I think you're hot. I think you're, attractive. And then I just am so mad that you left the toilet up. I can't even stand it. So we go through it every month. But if you've been on birth control a really long time, like you said, you're not seeing that amplitude of those hormones. I'm going to have to quickly do a sponsor kind of thing. So we'll do that. And I'm going to wrap back into Dr. Sarah Hill. So thankful that she's here with us today. But podcast sponsors, we're going to make a shout out to We Heart Nutrition, our supplement company that we sponsor, and we love their supplements because they have so many options. And today I want to focus on their immune support. They have immune support and probiotics, which we really know that people who are out there getting sick a lot, they need that support to their body. Check out We Heart Nutrition. Use our code GENIUS for 20% off your order. And then I was just talking to a patient about her fertility and gut health, and we were just kind of strategizing what else could we add to really help you. And she had been getting sick, and I said, you know what, I think colostrum would be a really great option to support your health. We talked about Wonder Cow colostrum because Jamie and I use Wonder Cow colostrum, and I never get sick. And I know it supports immune health because we know liquid gold that comes from a mammal is really supportive, has all of these antibodies in it. Check out Wonder Cow colostrum. You can get 30% off with our code HormoneGenius. And lastly, we want to make sure our skin looks amazing. Jamie and I, we're getting older. I'm older than her, but we want to make sure we're putting stuff on our skin that makes us feel moisturized. And tallow is a great way to support your skin in so many ways. Grazing Beauty Tallow, incredible Midwestern-made tallow. They have products for sunscreen, all sorts of soap and lotion products. Check out grazingbeauty.com for 10% off your order with our code HormoneGenius.
And Teresa, I'm going to share two more things, just shout outs real quick, okay? We have a perimenopause course that is now available on our website, hormonegenius.com. So if you are looking to get some support, health tips, hear real case studies, please visit our website, hormonegenius.com. The course is incredible. And then also Fiat Institute is taking applications for the hormone coach certification training. So if this feels like something you love, this idea of understanding the cycle in light of your health and working with women in this area, please be sure to visit fiatinstitute.com and get situated there. It's very clear once you get to the website because we are taking applications. So I just wanted to make sure I said that. And Teresa, I'm going to punt it back to you.
Yeah. So Dr. Hill, you have a daughter, and I'm sure you have thought about like the world that you grew up in and the world that now she is in. If you could kind of summarize, if you sat down with your daughter and you said, listen, these are all the things I wish I would have known, and especially in relationship to synthetic hormones, and possibly the idea that maybe we're not asking all the questions we should be asking. What are the things that you think she should be thinking about really truly to make an informed consent decision? Because we know, again, millions of women use birth control. It is sometimes a decision that is going to work for some women, but we want them to be making those decisions with all of the information. What are the things that you think most women wouldn't know that they really should know before making that decision?
I mean, it's just really that understanding that your hormones are part of your inherited wisdom that you've inherited from your ancestors, right? So we've inherited this brilliant brain that has, is the result of millions of years of an unbroken chain of successful survival and reproduction. I mean, like when you think about that, it's like actually really incredible. Like if any one of your direct ancestors would have failed to be able to attract a mate, get pregnant, and have a baby, you wouldn't be here. Just one, over all of those generations. It's really remarkable, right? So we've inherited this like brilliantly designed brain. And part of that, part of the process that we've inherited is a cycling brain that's sensitive to hormones. And when we shut that off, it's going to have unintended consequences throughout the body, including the way that we experience the world. Right. The way that we experience ourselves, the way we experience the world. And so it's just really understanding like the gravity of what you're doing by suppressing your hormones. And this doesn't mean that, that there's never a time and a place for hormonal birth control, but just understanding that that is a solution to a problem that creates its own problems, right? And so if you need it, that you can go on it, but then maybe consider finding something else, or if you don't need it, not be on it. So what I see a lot of girls did, what I did was, I was on it. I started on it when I was 18. And I was on it nonstop, regardless of whether I had a sexual partner or not, because I just seemed like the right, it was like easy to do. And like, what's the cost? But there is a cost. And I think that understanding that, right. And understanding that this is something that can work and it's safe. I think that sometimes there's a lot of boogeyman language that's being used around hormonal birth control that I don't really think is appropriate, because I do think that for some women, it definitely solves what for women has been a very big problem that we have to deal with. And that is how to regulate our fertility. And so I don't think that it's evil. I think there's a place for it. But just really understanding that it is going to create a set of psychological, behavioral, and physical trade-offs that aren't necessarily what you want. Yeah.
And it's so about informed consent, like you're sharing, like I think so many people make this decision and they don't know what decision they're making. Yeah. Okay, so Dr. Hill, we could be on for twice as long, and I would love every moment. But we got to wrap up, Dr. Hill. We learned so much from you today, and I'm going to ask you the question we ask every interviewee, and then Teresa will kind of wrap us up. But what do you wish every woman knew about her hormone genius?
That it is genius. I think that we have this tendency to pathologize our hormones, especially when we think about what happens in the second half of the menstrual cycle, and that it seems like it's problematic that our hormones cycle, and there's a lot of narrative around that, and women being irrational, and yada da da, and none of that is true, right? It is genius, right? Again, we've inherited this brain that is on purpose sensitive to our cycling sex hormones that helps to orient our brain and our body toward a state that's optimized for attraction and sex, and then that's optimized for implantation and pregnancy. And it's a really beautiful thing. So my advice there is recognize that your hormone genius is genius.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Embrace your hormone genius. I know, Dr. Hill, I've heard her say, understanding your cycle is so important. And, we're advocates. Learn your body. You can't understand all of these beautiful kind of things that your body is meant to do without kind of becoming aware of your cycle and the fluctuations of your hormones. So learn more, listen to our podcast, go listen to Sarah Hill and 1,000 other podcasts she's been on. But Dr. Sarah, how can people learn about you and stay in touch with you? What are the books that you would like to share with them? Anything else in terms of social media or anything you want in terms of staying in touch?
Sure. So you can find me online at sarahehill.com, and that's Sarah with an H. I'm on all social platforms as Sarah E. Hill, PhD. And again, Sarah with an H. My books, This Is Your Brain on Birth Control and The Period Brain, are available everywhere that books are sold. And I am actually going to be launching in the next probably month and a half my own podcast called The XX Lab, and it's going to be science and stories that matter for women. So,
wow, that is super exciting. Well, I'm sure everybody's going to sign up right away to listen to that. Thank you so much, Dr. Sarah Hill, for being with us on The Hormone Genius. We really appreciate it. We hope we get to spend some time with you in the future, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Hormone Genius podcast. Please remember to share our podcast with your friends and family, and also follow us on social media. If you were not aware, we have a YouTube channel. So if you could like and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay in the loop with all of our latest episodes, we would appreciate that. Thank you so much for your support. We are excited to journey alongside you as you discover the beauty and the genius of your hormones.